Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 10 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation.
For the Genesis halftime show starting right now, join Susie Colbert for the commercial-free Genesis halftime show starting right now. Join Susie Colbert for the Genesis halftime show starting right now.
There are certain innovations in the history of football on television that changed the game forever. The yellow first down line, Fox's creation of the score bug, the red zone channel. The NFL on television today is not what it was back in the 1950s. There have been many changes. The game has evolved in more ways than one. And a lot of these changes have been for the better. This was not one of them. This was a catastrophic failure. In 2017, ESPN had a crisis on their hands with Monday Night Football. Ratings and viewership for the program were in a state of decline. And in 2017, Monday Night Football games were watched by an average of 10.8 million viewers, which was the smallest viewership in the near 50-year history of the program. Play-by-play man Sean McDonough was reassigned, and color commentator John Gruden just took a massive 10-year deal to become the head coach of the then-named Oakland Raiders. The program was in a state of flux. They needed something to right the ship. Enter the Genesis halftime show, a bold new plan to try and revive Monday Night Football. And the end result of this plan? Not good. At all. This is the story of one of the worst things in the history of Monday Night Football. This is the history of the Genesis halftime show. It's important to note that Monday Night Football has always been about pop culture. It's never been solely about the game. For years and years, Monday Night Football, in particular, has tried to find ways to mix the world of entertainment and the world of sports. The halftime show always used to feature prominent guests, most notably in 1980, when Vice President George H.W. Bush was interviewed, and in 2008, when Barack Obama and John McCain were interviewed. Arnold Schwarzenegger was on the halftime show in 2000 during the Monday Night Miracle between the Jets and the Dolphins, where he boldly predicted that the Jets will be back, and he was right. They had a comedian in the booth for 2 seasons in Dennis Miller, which didn't work out. They had cold opens that blended popular movies and TV shows with the game. This included a really ill-advised Desperate Housewives intro, which some NFL personnel described as pornographic. You can check that video out in the upper right corner. And perhaps the biggest pop culture moment and blending of these two realms came in 1980 with the announcement of the assassination of John Lennon. But the most constant and consistent way that Monday Night Football has tried this integration is through music. In a 2006 game between the Saints and the Falcons, which reopened the Superdome after Hurricane Katrina, ESPN aired a pregame show which featured U2 and Green Day. The performance of the Saints Are Coming was so monumental and so well received, in fact, that it charted in countries around the world. Hank Williams Jr.'s performance of All My Rowdy Friends before each broadcast changed the game of TV introductions forever, and is one of the most iconic themes in sports television. You are not seeing Carrie Underwood on Sunday Night Football on NBC without Hank Williams paving the way. In 1998, though, ABC tried another integration with music. Ratings had been in a steady decline since 1994, as the average rating in 5 years dipped from an 18 to a 14. You can blame that on a bunch of different things, from more competition from cable networks, particularly in sports, to the rise in popularity of NFL Sunday Ticket, making it so that you can watch any team any week and didn't have to rely on the game in your market, to television ratings going down across the board. But they tried to do something to boost their ratings, and it came in the form of a halftime show. How the halftime show worked was like this. Chris Berman would be covering it in front of a crowd from the ESPN zone, and would start off by going over the top 10 plays of the week. And after a quick commercial break, one of two things would happen. Either we'd get analysis of the game or some college football notes, or we would get a pop culture moment, most notably in the form of a music video. This plan didn't work. The ratings continued to decline, and they actually hit an all-time 29-year low. Nobody seemed to care about the halftime show, and it didn't do anything to boost ratings. In fact, The most notable thing that happened during the 1998 season for Monday Night Football was when this hot mic moment featuring Al Michaels happened.
All right.
Are you going to tell him how you're sick of this Boston College stuff?
No shit.
He would get traded for a rabbit 8 years later. Now, 2 decades later, Monday Night Football was facing a similar crossroads. Ratings were going down the drain for a variety of reasons. The other entertainment options, especially with more cable channels and streaming services, were greater than ever before. The matchups weren't that great. Thursday Night Football had gained popularity, to the point where it was starting to overtake Monday nights as the marquee weekday game. The controversy in the wake of the anthem protests. Ratings once again were at an all-time low. They shook up the booth after John Gruden took a head coaching job, adding Joe Tessitore, Jason Witten, and Booger McFarland. The only problem? People could tell after one preseason game that this was going to be a disaster, and if anything, was going to make the ratings even worse. ESPN tried capitalizing on the success that CBS had hiring Tony Romo, and they failed miserably.
You're going to see him on the outside. He's going to come up and around the edge and collapse that corner. It's tough on these linebackers, and when they do that, it's all about the rush inside. They have a little ET game, just shakes it off. It's hard.
Jason Witten sounded uncomfortable and had no idea what he was doing. And the Boogermobile was a disaster, as it was unnecessary, offered nothing, and detracted from the in-stadium experience, because the contraption blocked people's sightlines. You could see the wheels start spinning at ESPN, because after negative reviews from the preseason games, they were scrambling to find something to boost the program's credibility and prestige, which had fallen hard in recent years. And so, they did it with a staple of the program for close to half a century. They did it with a musical performance. Enter the Genesis Halftime Show. I want to emphasize just how much of a last-minute Hail Mary desperation play this was. The Genesis Halftime Show did not exist for any of the Monday Night Football games during the preseason. It was announced by ESPN on September 10th, 2018. The first Monday Night Football game that season was on, you guessed it, September 10th, 2018. Also, to emphasize just how last minute this was, Tori Kelly posted this on her Twitter feed on September 9th, roughly 24 hours before. If you think that this was just a marketing strategy to announce it at the last minute, like a surprise album drop, it wasn't. Not when the first show was filmed a grand total of 24 hours before it was set to debut. Genesis saw an opening in sponsors after Toyota, which used to do the halftime show, switched over to Fox for Thursday Night Football. It was set to be a commercial-free performance featuring names and music. In fact, ESPN was so confident that this would work that Ed Earhart, the president of global sales and marketing at the time, said that Genesis had the first option to have the show next year. ESPN and Genesis were set on changing the game. Nobody really knew what this was going to be, or how this was going to look. All that we knew was that the first performance was going to be a tribute to Aretha Franklin, done by Boyz II Men and Tori Kelly. And so, at halftime of the game between the Jets and the Lions, history was made. This was going to be the start of a brand new era. Welcome to the Genesis Halftime Show.
Rock steady, baby, that's what I feel now.
Just call the song exactly what it is.
Wait. What is this? This is just a pre-recorded video in black and white for some reason where nothing is happening. They're just standing there in the studio. This was their innovative idea? I think when a lot of fans heard about the Genesis Halftime Show, they assumed that it was going to be a live performance. Most of the time, however, it was not. And therein lies the first problem with the show. The fact that everything was pre-recorded was a major turnoff. There needs to be some element of spontaneity with music performances that differentiate them from just listening to them on Spotify. Pre-recorded performances, especially when done like this, don't do that. Why everything was in black and white also made no sense at all. The artistic choice made it look like there was something wrong with my TV whenever I turned on the show. There's another major problem that should be apparent just by the first performance. ESPN and Genesis, for the most part, did not move the needle at all with the names that they got for the show. Remember, in 1998, Monday Night Football on ABC got Shania Twain to do something like this. It was almost the exact same thing. I'm assuming there was advertising for that, and I'm assuming ABC at least tried to promote it. And keep in mind that Shania Twain was arguably the biggest female star in the world back in 1998. Garth Brooks revived popular country music at the start of the decade after what felt like years without a country star, but Shania Twain was the first pop country star in years, at least since the days of Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton, and Eddie Rabbitt. And that couldn't move the needle. That did nothing to help the ratings. So what makes you think that you're going to make this work by getting Boyz II Men and Tori Kelly, with no advertising whatsoever and no promotion whatsoever, to do a pre-recorded video? I love Boyz II Men, and Tori Kelly's got a great voice and a couple of songs that I really like and should have been hits. But that's not going to do anything. The problem with the show was that the only way you found out about it was by watching the game already. Look at the Super Bowl halftime show. The point of that is to draw people in who wouldn't normally watch the game. Obviously, that works. With the Genesis halftime show, it's being aired on a sports cable network. It's not on an over-the-air channel like ABC or Fox. You're doing no promotion whatsoever, and the only way to find out who's performing is by actually watching the game. Very rarely were there any announcements from the previous week about who the performer for the next show would be. So your audience that you're trying to tap into is an audience already watching the game, and an audience that, for the most part, really doesn't care about stuff like this. They only care about football. Their main audience that they were trying to attract had no idea that this even existed. A 90-second pre-recorded video doesn't appeal to anyone. But here's the sad part. The video I just showed, I kid you not, was one of the better Genesis halftime shows. Things did not get better from here. After 1 week, in which there were 2 Genesis halftime shows of the exact same song for some reason, everyone knew that this was going to be a disaster. Seriously, they did the same song twice for each game of the doubleheader instead of doing 2 different songs. Reception was not positive. Whether it was the pre-recorded nature, the fact that they were not getting A, B, or even C-list stars to do the show, the black and white aesthetic, or the fact that it was advertised as commercial-free, when in reality you were getting bombarded by tons of commercials for Genesis, the reaction to the show was not good. And as it turns out, it was about to get a lot worse. You see, the first show made sense at least, even if the execution wasn't that good. Aretha Franklin had just passed away less than a month prior, and the first game was being held in Detroit. Aretha had obvious connections to the city. She grew up there, she died and was buried there, and did work with the NFL in Detroit, performing the national anthem at Super Bowl 40, and performing what might be the longest rendition of the anthem in history in a 2016 Thanksgiving game for the Lions. This is also a fantastic time to bring up the greatest graphic ever aired. Plus, Boyz II Men, even though they're not from Detroit, were on Motown Records. Again, I didn't enjoy the show at all, but the concept made sense. The second show, though, things just flew off the rails. Here was an article from Ad Age about what the show was supposed to be like. It said each artist selected to appear in ESPN's new halftime show will have a special connection to the host city. By week 2, that was already out the window, because they got Cheat Codes, a Los Angeles-based DJ group, to perform. This clearly lip-sync performance, where nothing creative is happening whatsoever, doesn't work. There's nothing from this that I can't get from Spotify. But this is where the backlash really began. After 2 weeks, the halftime show was getting scathing reviews because of what they didn't show. At halftime of the game between the Seahawks and the Bears, legendary linebacker Brian Urlacher received his Hall of Fame Ring of Excellence. Personal feelings on Urlacher aside, since he's been in the news lately, he was one of the best linebackers of the 2000s. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and rightfully so. He made 8 Pro Bowls, anchored Chicago's defense throughout the 2000s, and has won Defensive Rookie of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year. The man could play football, and at least at the time of this ceremony, was universally loved by Chicago. And ESPN decided not to show the ceremony so that they could air this Cheat Codes music video. So now you've alienated your football audience by not showing a really important moment, and your non-football audience that you're trying to attract still has no idea that you even exist. Considering the fact that ESPN even mentioned the Brian Urlacher ceremony during the broadcast a few times, this felt like a slap in the face. Nobody was happy about this. ESPN Vice President of Production, Jay Rothman, apologized after the game, saying that the decision not to air the ceremony over a glorified Cheat Codes music video was a miss. A Reddit post about the ceremony's omission became the #1 story of the day on the NFL subreddit, with universal scathing. In 1 week, the show went from announcement to universal hatred. So there's nowhere to go but up, right? In week 3, Flo Rida performed what was essentially Good Vibrations by Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, but a million times worse. In week 4, Good Charlotte performed, and they just didn't even try. There's no imagery whatsoever of Denver or Broncos fans or anything like that, unlike the previous 2 weeks, as discombobulated as those were. Also, this is a really good sign when we're already on the 4th installment, and you're resorting to a band that hadn't had a hit since 2007, and was performing a song that they didn't even release as a single. Seriously, if you're going to have the opportunity to air a music video in front of 10 million people, don't pick a non-single. This might be one of the worst ones yet from a staging perspective. Nothing is happening here. There is no movement. With 90% of these, it feels more like I'm watching a commercial than an actual halftime show. Lil Wayne performed in week 5 and he's just standing in front of a car the whole time. It also doesn't help that there are way too many moments of silence where they have to censor it out due to language. Week 6, for all the wrong reasons, delivered one of the best moments in the history of the show, with a line that described pretty much everyone's feelings on the show by this point.
Coming up, a special performance by Garbage.
The show was also not that good, but at least Garbage is a Wisconsin band and they were performing outside Lambeau Field, so there was some connection. At the very least, it was better than week 7, when Lil Yachty performed. This show was atrocious. It was a heavily auto-tuned mess featuring Lil Yachty just bouncing around in a warehouse. In fact, the show was so bad that former MLB pitcher Travis Blackley called the show trash, and Lil Yachty actually clapped back. That's always a good sign when everyone thinks your performance is terrible, and you have to respond. Now, was every halftime show bad? No. Case in point, the very next one was taking place in Buffalo for a game between the Bills and the Patriots. And this might be one of the few times they actually got it right, even though the band has no connection to Buffalo whatsoever. For one, even though this is pre-recorded, this isn't lip-synced. This is not the studio version of the song, and I can respect that. Number 2, this is actually a unique location. No bouncing around in a warehouse or in front of a car or on a random stage. This was done in front of Niagara Falls. They actually put some effort into this one. And number 3, unlike other bands and artists that perform non-singles or brand new songs that nobody's heard of, Bush is out there performing a hit from the 90s. I know a lot of this video is going to be very critical of the halftime show, but I'll give credit where credit is due. They actually got it right with this performance. Turns out, in terms of the pre-recorded ones though, this was just a fluke. They got Jessie J to do the Week 9 show in Dallas, and it's the same problem that Good Charlotte had. Nothing's happening, it's a boring stage, there's no connection to the city or the surrounding area, and the song was released as a single over 14 months before, doing absolutely nothing on the charts. Why you're doing an old single that was a flop, I don't know. But in week 10, something incredible happened. Something that may have flipped the tide.
Coming up, a special live performance by the United States Air Force Band of the Golden West.
That's right. For the first time ever, we got a live performance. In honor of Veterans Day, the band of the Golden West performed at halftime on the field at Levi's Stadium. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any footage of the show, but I do remember watching this live, and it wasn't very good as the vocals were shaky. But they went live, which is what I always said the show should have been to begin with. I will take a live show over anything pre-recorded any day of the week. And then we got another one. The following week, the Chainsmokers performed live with Kelsey Ballerini. And yeah, this is legitimately awesome. Seriously. First off, the planning that this took is incredible, considering the fact that this game was moved to the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum at the last minute due to poor field conditions at Estadio Azteca. There's pyrotechnics. The shot of Ballerini overlooking the stadium audience is great. The vocals, Kelsey Ballerini's vocals are great. This legitimately feels like a halftime show. That's now back-to-back weeks that we've gotten actual live performances. This feels a lot like an abbreviated halftime show at the Grey Cup, which is a really good thing. If every Genesis halftime show was like this, I don't think there would have been too many complaints. Could it be that ESPN and Genesis were listening to the feedback? Could it be that the halftime show was going to start feeling more like a halftime show and not like a glorified advertisement in a black and white music video? Of course not. Turns out, this was just a fluke. So you might have found a formula that worked that people seem to enjoy with actual live performances. And now the popularity of Monday Night Football is starting to rise again, because at the same time, the Chiefs and the Rams battled it out in a 54-51 shootout, regarded by some as the greatest game in the history of Monday Night Football. For the first time in what feels like forever, and at the very least the first time since the days of Mike Tirico and John Gruden, you have momentum on your side. Time to screw it all up and go back to what everyone hated. A pre-recorded, heavily auto-tuned performance by Bad Bunny in Week 12, where the only thing Texas about it was the cowboy hats and the Texas flag. The SpongeBob song about Texas had more connection than this halftime show. Fortunately, Bad Bunny would deliver a much better and much more praised performance at the Super Bowl halftime show over a year later. Black thought of the Roots doing a pre-recorded performance in a Week 13 game in Philadelphia. Again, we've got pretty boring staging where nothing's really going on, and the band is performing a non-single. The Week 14 one with Sierra in Seattle isn't that bad, as the choreography is really tight and they're actually trying to make it seem like a halftime performance. But then we're back to the basics with some of the most basic staging you're ever going to see, with Daughtry's lip-sync performance in Week 15 for a game against Carolina. And I'll give Week 16 a pass, even though it's pre-recorded, since it took place on Christmas Eve, and it is a Christmas performance. I can't hate on Christmas. I may be a Scrooge at times in this video, but I'm not that big of a Scrooge. If you're doing the math at home, that concludes the first season. 16 halftime shows, 14 of them were pre-recorded, with just 2 of them being live. Many of them had nothing to do whatsoever with the city that the game was being played in. Many of them had boring staging and were simply there to promote luxury cars. In my eyes, they batted somewhere around 250. For an MLB player, that's alright. For a halftime show though, that's terrible. Let's go over just some of the complaints from the first season. Pre-recorded performances that were normally boring at best, and a punishment on the ears at worst. Aesthetics that weren't pleasing. False promises, including the belief that it would actually be live. And the fact that they promised to have Zach Brown Band perform, but never did. Questionable song choices. Overall, the show was a mess. After 2018, the ratings were still not where ESPN wanted them to be at, while the reviews were getting worse and worse. It wasn't just the halftime show, but rather Jason Witten not improving, Joe Tessitore getting excited over everything, and the Boogermobile being a giant and completely unnecessary distraction. The only positive that people took away from the non-football side of things was this incredible call made by Booger in a Patriots-Bills game.
When you look at Kelvin Benjamin, guys, he's 6'5", he's 245 pounds. He's probably a Popeye's biscuit away from being a tight end.
Booger wasn't great on Monday Night Football, or even particularly good, but we'll always have that one moment, and for that I am forever grateful. The Genesis halftime show seemed like a failure, but ESPN and Genesis were not ready to let this die. They were bringing it back for a second season, and they listened to the criticism and they made some changes. Unfortunately, I don't know who they were listening to, because the changes they made were the exact opposite of what people asked for. They made it longer. Yes, you heard that right. For Season 2 of the Genesis halftime show, they decided that the main problem was that the shows were too short. They were only 90 seconds long. Clearly, that was what the problem was. In 2019, the Genesis halftime show went from 1:30 to 2 minutes and 30 seconds, expanding its running time by a full minute. What transpired to start off the 2019 slate was a performance by G-Eazy that was, without a doubt, the worst Genesis halftime show of all time. I'm not crazy enough to rank all the performances individually, but I can safely say without a doubt that this one is way at the bottom. It is literally just G-Eazy lip-syncing in a warehouse while riding on top of a luxury car. And to make matters worse, because this was week 1, it was the Monday night doubleheader, so we got to see this awful performance twice. The performance was universally panned. It was trending on Twitter for just how bad it was. Even Scott Hansen, who works for the NFL, called the performance awful. By default, things got better as the weeks went on, but again, that's not saying much. For week 2, we got a performance by Taney and Anuel. Heavily auto-tuned, nothing going on staging-wise, and just not very good. But at least it wasn't G-Eazy. For week 3, they did about the laziest thing possible with Blink-182, and didn't even shoot a new video. They just took footage of the band performing a song at one of their concerts. we have completely given up by this point. At least we got Snoop Dogg for the Steelers game in Week 4, where he performed a song called First Place, even though the game was between two teams at 0-3, one of which was the Cincinnati Bengals, who would wind up with the first pick in the draft. Great timing. There was actually a semi-decent halftime show in Week 5, where 5 Seconds of Summer performs the song Teeth, a song that I really happen to like. It also helps that even though the staging is boring, the vocals are not pre-recorded. Of all the pre-recorded halftime shows, this one's probably my favorite. It's right up there with the Bush one, because there is at least a live element to it, and it's a song that actually works for a halftime show. Seriously, I don't know how you can't get hyped when listening to this song. Then for the first time all season, we finally got a live performance, when Brantley Gilbert performed at Week 6. Again, I will always take a live performance over anything pre-recorded, because those actually feel like halftime shows. Unfortunately, this one is really bad, as Gilbert's vocals sound terrible, and the backing band did one of the worst jobs of playing to a backing track you're ever going to see. And for Week 7, it was back to the pre-recorded stuff, as we had Charlie Puth just unenthusiastically singing around a pool. He beats his Subway ads during the NHL playoffs, I can tell you that much. By this point, the halftime show had become a punching bag. People either hated the show or were ironically enthusiastic about it. On October 28th, the plan was to have the Black Eyed Peas perform their shot at redemption by doing the halftime show at a football game over 8 years after the Super Bowl 45 halftime show, which may have legitimately killed their careers before this revival they've had in 2020. But then when October 28th rolled around, the Peas were nowhere to be found. Because just like that, the Genesis halftime show was canceled.
Poochie's dead!
In a statement put out by ESPN, they announced that they were cutting the show short. On the day of the Steelers-Dolphins game, they announced that the Genesis halftime show was no more. Instead, they shifted their halftime show to, get this, analysis of the game and highlights of the game. Who would have thunk it? Who would have thought that showing football stuff at halftime of a football game would be better than pre-recorded videos?
It's what we wanted all along!
The show by this point was gone. No longer would people have to mute their televisions. No longer would people have to be subjected to awful black and white performances. The days of suffering were over. But when I thought about it, I thought to myself, did it have to be this way? Could something like the Genesis halftime show have worked? This feels like a twofold question. Could this have worked? Yes. Could this have worked in the format that they tried? Absolutely 100% positively not. If each week there was an actual live performance in the stadium that was shown, where you've got pyrotechnics and you're making it a semi-scaled down version of a Grey Cup halftime show, I don't think there would have been too many complaints. There's something about the energy of a live performance that, when done right, is contagious through the TV and isn't captured through pre-recorded performances that are heavily edited. If every Genesis halftime show was like the one featuring the Chainsmokers and Kelsey Ballerini, there might have been something there. The problem was that performances like those were few and far between. They got off on the wrong foot with the Brian Urlacher debacle and were never able to get that goodwill back. Even after a stretch in the middle of 2018 where the shows were, on the whole, not that bad. The shows got longer, but worse than that, the shows got lazier. The staging for season 1 was hit or miss, but there were some hits, like Bush performing in front of Niagara Falls, and Sierra doing a heavily choreographed performance. For season 2, it was just having the artists stand there. In some cases, like with Blink-182, it wasn't even filmed for the halftime show. I can't fault ESPN for trying to spice up the product. Let's face it, Monday Night Football is not what it once was, and I'm not sure it ever will be as long as it stays on ESPN. It fell behind Sunday Night Football the moment NBC took over, and it fell behind Thursday Night Football the moment Fox took over. Monday night games are no longer the marquee attraction that they once were, so to try something to get it back on good standing wasn't a bad idea. What I can fault ESPN for is just how awful an idea this was. It was lazily put together, and if it didn't work in the 90s when you could actually cross-promote to a non-football audience because you were on ABC, and when you had A-list stars, why did you think a worse, more hastily put together version of this could actually work? This idea in its current format was doomed from the start. The way it was put together, combined with the awful production qualities compared to other games, and a terrible, just hard to listen to announcing booth, gave people the worst possible impression of ESPN. That was the impression that they just don't care. Where Monday Night Football goes from here remains to be seen. It's not going away anytime soon, although we might be entering a new era. The three-man booth of Steve Levy, Louis Riddick, and Brian Greasy isn't going to move the needle, and I'm always skeptical of three-man booths, but it is a solid booth on paper. And heck, I thought Louis Riddick should have gotten the job for color commentator over Jason Witten back in 2018. And there is talk that ABC is trying to get back into the race to broadcast games, which could lead to ABC and ESPN simulcasting games and doing a megacast of sorts like ESPN does with the college football playoff games. At the very least, whatever the future holds for Monday Night Football, it sure as heck won't include the Genesis Halftime Show. Special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.